A young boy started screaming about World War II plane crashes and seemed to know Navy details no toddler ever should. A girl in India said she had a husband and son in another life, then met with them and knew everything about their house. A boy in Scotland kept crying to go home to an island he'd never seen. And when he got there, everything he described was real. When James Lanninger was just 2 years old, he started having violent nightmares about crashing in a plane. He'd wake up screaming about being stuck in a fire or yelling things like airplane crash and the little man can't get out. During the day, he started naming aircraft parts most toddlers wouldn't know existed, things like drop tanks and Corsairs. He also kept saying he'd flown off a ship called the Natoma and that his name had been James. His parents eventually looked into it and discovered the USS Natoma Bay was a real World War II aircraft carrier. They found a pilot on its roster named James Huston Jr. who died in combat. The plane was shot down and exploded. James the toddler also named another pilot from that crew who was still alive at the time, and when they met, the child recognized him instantly. On top of that, James could recall specific events and details of battles that matched Navy records. His parents had never really talked to him about this stuff at home, and none of it was in any children's books. As he got older, the memories started to fade, but for a while, it seemed like this kid was actually remembering a past life. At 4 years old, Shanti Devi in India started insisting that she had another family in a different town. She told her parents she wasn't really their daughter, that her real name was Lugdi Devi, and she'd lived in Mathura, about 75 miles away. She said she died giving birth to a son and gave the full name of her husband, the town he lived in, what he looked like, and even the layout of their house. At first, everyone thought she was just making things up, but when they actually looked into it, her descriptions lined up. A man named Kedar Nath lived in Mathura, had a wife named Lugdi who died during childbirth, and had a son. When Shanti met him, she instantly recognized him and greeted him like she knew him. She also correctly pointed out places and people in towns she'd supposedly never seen. Word got around and the case became so well known that a commission was set up by order of Gandhi himself. They interviewed witnesses, retraced her claims, and found that almost everything she said had a real-world match. Cameron McCully was a regular kid growing up in Glasgow, until around age 5 when he started talking non-stop about a place called the Isle of Barra. He claimed he used to live there in a white house by the sea with a black and white dog and a family that he really missed. He talked about planes landing on the beach, his old dad named Shane Robertson, and how his old life had ended when he, quote, fell through. His parents had never even mentioned Barra before, but Cameron was convinced. Eventually they took him to the island, and it turned out there really was a white house by the sea, just like he described. But I mean, whatever, right? A white house, it's not like there aren't any other white houses in the world. Well, this one belonged to a Robertson family, again, just like young Cameron had described. Cameron was walking around like he'd been there before, naming things and pointing out details that lined up with what he'd talked about before. There were no obvious signs of how he could have known any of this. And his memories seemed emotional, not just factual. It didn't seem like he was just repeating stuff. It was as if he was genuinely grieving a life he'd left behind. In 1987, a little girl named Perneima Akaniac was born in Bakumana, Sri Lanka. She was like most kids, except for the fact that she kept talking about being crushed by a heap of iron. She'd also always tell her mother things like people who drive over others are bad, which is of course true, but it was odd that she seemed particularly focused on that specific thing, driving over someone. And when her mom got upset about a car accident that had happened one day, Perneima calmly told her not to worry because she had also died in a crash. She said a big vehicle hit her and she never made it to the hospital. Things got weirder when she started saying she used to make incense, and their name had used to be Jinadasa. She also described 2 types of incense, how she made them, and how she used to walk around with her hands behind her back, supervising workers. She also claimed she lived across the river from a temple, which was over 140 miles away from her actual home. When her family finally took her there, she started pointing out familiar places and recognized people by name. And the man she used to be, who'd died in a car accident, he was real. His name was Janadasa Pereira, and he died in 1985, 2 years before Perneima was born, when a bus ran him over while he was selling incense on his bike. And to top it off, she had a birthmark exactly where Pereira's chest had been crushed. Since childhood, Jenny Cockle would have recurring dreams of being a woman named Mary Sutton, who lived in Ireland, had several children, and died young in the 1930s. As she got older, Jenny became obsessed with finding out if Mary was real. She started piecing together what she remembered, names, locations, and the layout of Mary's old home. Eventually, she tracked down a town in Ireland that matched. She discovered that a woman named Mary Sutton had lived there and had died, leaving behind children. Jenny eventually reached out to them, now elderly, and met with them in person. And to their surprise, she knew all these intimate details about their lives, their personalities as kids, and even specific incidents from their childhood that had never been published or shared. One of the sons in particular became convinced that Jenny really was his mother reincarnated. He said she had the same mannerisms and emotional connection to them that Mary had. Emad Alawir was just under 2 years old when he started telling his parents about a life he had claimed to have lived in another village about 25 miles from where he was growing up in Lebanon. He gave names, described a yellow car he used to own, and spoke about specific relatives, neighbors, and his former job. His family wasn't all that worried at first, but when Emad suddenly ran to a stranger on the street one day and hugged the man as if he recognized him, and it turned out this person was actually from the town Emad had claimed he'd lived in his past life, well, this intrigued his parents. Eventually, they contacted Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist who'd been studying cases of past life memories. Stevenson documented that Emad made 47 specific statements about his supposed past life. When Stevenson and the Alawir family visited the town, it turned out that 44 of those 47 statements matched up with the real-life story of a man named Ibrahim Boumsi, who died 5 years before Emad was born. Another important detail is that the child Emad would often talk about how thankful he was for being able to walk. Well, Ibrahim died around the age of 25 after spending a year in a sanatorium. He had tuberculosis and was confined to a bed during the final part of his life. Barbro Karlin was a Swedish writer and poet. When she was just 2 years old, though, she started telling her parents that she was Anne Frank. Her family wasn't religious, and she hadn't been taught anything about the Holocaust yet, but Barbro described details of Anne Frank's life that she shouldn't have known. What the secret annex looked like, how the rooms were arranged, and the names of the people who'd lived there. When her parents finally took her to Amsterdam at age 10, she led them straight to the building without a map or a guide. Once inside, she pointed out changes that had been made to the house since she had lived there. She also seemed terrified of men in uniforms, even if they were just policemen on the street. Barbro went on to become a well-known writer and stood by her memories well into adulthood. She said she remembered parts of her death, the fear of being taken, and a sense of injustice that followed her for years. Simei Tetsumus was born with a misshapen right ear, which his parents chalked up to a birth defect, but when he started talking, he claimed it was from being shot in the head in a past life. He'd said he'd been a man named Salim Fasli, a farmer from another village who'd been killed while working in his fields. He recognized people Salim had known, including his widow, and called her by name. He also gave names of Salim's kids and talked about private conversations and daily routines that no stranger would realistically know. Dr. Ian Stevenson, the same researcher who studied Emad Alawir, investigated Simei's case and found it pretty compelling. Salim had in fact been shot dead, and Simei's ear deformity was right where the bullet had entered. The way Simei talked about Salim's life was natural, like he was recalling memories instead of making things up. One of the eeriest parts was how Simei's personality was different from other kids in his village. He was more serious and cautious, traits Salim's family said matched the man that they had remembered. Chennai Chumalewang was born in Thailand in 1967. When he was just 3 years old, he started saying he used to be a school teacher named Bua Kai. He claimed he'd been killed while riding his bicycle to work. His story got weirder when his family noticed he had two unusual birthmarks, one on the back of his head and another above his left eye. Well, Bua Kai was a real person who had died. And according to his autopsy report, the entry and exit wounds of the bullet that killed him matched up perfectly with Chennai's birthmarks. Chennai kept insisting he wanted to go home and would say the name of the village where he said he'd lived. Eventually his grandma took him there, and without hesitation he walked up to Bukkai's old house. He correctly identified the man's parents and described items that had been in the home years earlier. He also remembered details like the name of Kai's bicycle and how he used to teach math. This case takes a turn from creepy to downright chilling. So a 3-year-old boy in Golan Heights, a region between Syria and Israel, started telling his family he'd been killed in a past life. He said he died when he was attacked with an axe and was buried in a nearby field. Elders in the community followed him to the spot, where they dug up a human skeleton with a wound in the skull, right where the boy said the axe had struck. Not only that, but the boy claimed to remember the name of his killer. When they confronted the man, he allegedly confessed. The whole thing was documented by Dr. Eli Lash, a respected physician known for his public health work. He said the boy's memories were disturbingly detailed, right down to the type of axe used.
What if every doodle you made was actually a window into your future self? Since age 7, Alex has been idly sketching the same man's face, beard, top knot, shaven sides throughout school and college. For 3 decades, the image remained just a doodle, nothing like his own reflection. Then, a year ago, Alex rediscovered his old notebooks and froze. The face in those drawings was now his face, down to every whisker and hairstyle detail. He'd never changed his look to match the sketches, nor had he consciously remembered drawing them, yet here they were, trapped in time. Was Alex unknowingly crafting a portrait of his future self, or did the universe slip him a glimpse from a parallel life where this was already reality? What if your next-door neighbor never existed, except in your memories? In autumn 2012, Columbus nurse Danielle Miller pulled into her driveway and saw a moving van parked next to her longtime neighbor's home. She waved and yelled hello, but no one answered. When she asked around, other neighbors were baffled. There had been no resident there for over 10 years, and county property records showed the lot vacant since 2001. Danielle even found official tax bills listing the address as unassigned, yet her smartphone photos captured the moving truck, the name on its side, and the familiar porch of the house she'd known since childhood. In a single night, the entire residence and the person she'd shared block parties with vanished from every public record. Picture stepping onto a train that, according to every schedule, shouldn't exist. In 1973, Boston commuter Mark Patterson regularly took the 7:45 p.m. line from South Station. One evening, bleary-eyed from working overtime, he boarded what he assumed was his usual train. 2 stops later, he glanced at the station sign and froze. It read Oldwick Junction, a station that shut down since the 1940s. Confused, Mark asked the conductor, who stared blankly and slapped his ticket, "All aboard for Oldwick," he said. When Mark disembarked at his apparent destination, the platform was bustling, but the schedule board listed no trains stopping there after dusk. Maintenance crews later confirmed the rails were decommissioned decades earlier. Mark's ride remains unexplained, leading him to wonder if he accidentally hopped into a parallel timeline's commuter system. Think you remember every Sinbad movie? Think again. Ask anyone born in the late 80s if they saw Shazam, the 1990s comedy where Sinbad plays a genie granting hilarious wishes, and 9 out of 10 people will swear it's real. I've seen this movie. They recall promotional tie-in toys, VHS covers with Sinbad's face, even commercials with that unforgettable theme song. Yet no studio records exist, no scripts, no posters in Viacom or 20th Century Archives. Sinbad himself has denied starring in any such film, and no footage has ever surfaced. This Mandela effect anomaly suggests millions briefly flit into a universe where Sinbad's genie movie actually existed, only to return claiming it never was. How did a single letter disappear from every bottle of Febreze overnight? For years, people swore they bought Febreze, an air freshener spelled Febreze. Then one day, retailers everywhere stocked Febreze, with just one E before the Z. Complaints flooded consumer forums. They changed the name without telling us. Yet corporate archives show it's always been Febreze with one E before the Z. Even longtime employees admit they remember the extra E. Was this a simple rebranding, or did millions of shoppers briefly slip into a parallel market where that second E never existed? What if a dream could order your real-world actions? College student Priya dreamed 3 nights in a row of her roommate Sarah handing her an envelope at 3:33 a.m., urging her to open it right away. The very next night at 3:33 a.m., Priya awoke to find a delivery slip tucked under her door. On impulse, she retrieved the package from the lobby. Inside was a sealed envelope labeled "Open at 3:33 tomorrow." Heart pounding, Priya obeyed and found a letter from Sarah warning Priya not to take a certain bus trip, citing a recent accident in the news. What was odd was that the next day, Priya had a trip planned on this exact bus, and in a dark twist of fate, that day and that exact ride Priya had booked did crash minutes after leaving. Priya swears she dream-walked into information from a timeline where she'd heeded Sarah's warning days earlier. Have you ever looked at a building and seen something that couldn't belong there? Photographer Theo was snapping long exposure shots of downtown Chicago's skyline. He took 2 identical frames 10 seconds apart. Reviewing them later, he noticed in the first photo a gleaming glass tower that stood adjacent to the Sears Tower. In the second photo, same angle, same time, the tower was gone. When Theo rushed outside, the block looked unchanged. No extra skyscraper, no construction site. Neighbors had no memory of anything ever existing there. Records confirmed the plot was empty for decades. Theo insists his camera glimpsed a structure from another reality and that his lens just happened to catch its brief crossover. What if your doppelganger lives a life eerily parallel to yours, just miles away? In 2011, British IT consultant David Clark Googled his own name and found another David Clark living in Manchester with the same birthday, same middle name, and even the same job title at a rival tech firm. Intrigued, he reached out and discovered the other David had the same childhood nickname, had traveled to the same backpacking hostel in Thailand in 2005, and even shared a rare allergy to kiwi. Yet neither man had ever met or even knew of each other until that Google search. DNA testing confirmed that they weren't related. "It's looking like a mirror image of my life," David said. Was this an improbable coincidence, or did 2 parallel streams of Earth diverge, spawning twin lives in different locales? Have you ever walked into a library and checked out a book that shouldn't really exist? Librarian Maria Perez was reorganizing a decades-old archive when she stumbled on a title called The 8th Sign of the Zodiac, published in 1978 by a local press. Curious, she tried to locate any record of the publisher or the author. Nothing. No ISBN, no reviews, no library listings anywhere else in the country. Even the author's name, Thomas Adler, turned up 0 hits. Maria flipped through the manuscript. It contained references to cultural phenomena that didn't exist until the 1990s, and when pressed, her library's old accession logs showed the book being cataloged in 1980, 2 years before anyone invented the ideas in its pages. Maria suspects the book slipped in from another timeline where those cultural milestones happened early. Could a single subway stop be the gateway to another world? New York City bus driver Ricardo Luna always ended his shift at the 23rd Street Depot. One night he took a shortcut through the subway tunnel and noticed a dimly lit station sign that read 23rd Street, but the platform looked brand new, with shiny white tile and digital display boards. Ricardo walked through expecting to find the main concourse, but emerged instead onto an entirely unfamiliar street corner. Phone maps showed him near 57th Street. Panicked, he retraced his steps only to arrive back at the usual, worn-out 23rd Street exit. The renovated station had vanished. Ricardo insists he stepped into a parallel version of the subway, if only for a minute.
Alright, this one's a bit of a strange rabbit hole. It revolves around a movie that doesn't actually exist, but has a bizarre legend attached to it. So there's this film that supposedly starred the actor Sinbad. If you're like me, you know him from the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Jingle All the Way, but some also remember Sinbad having been in this movie called Shazam in the 90s, where he played a genie. The premise is that he granted wishes and caused chaos in typical 90s kids movie fashion. A lot of people swear they saw this movie, renting it or watching reruns of it on TV. The only problem is no one can find it now. For years, years, people have tried to track down any trace of this Shazam movie, but it doesn't seem to exist anywhere in any record. Sinbad himself has even come out and said yeah, I never made that movie. And yet, a surprising number of people are adamant that they remember it. It's become one of the more popular Mandela effects, where a large number of people remember something one way, which turns out to be different, or in this case, not even existing at all. So, what's going on here? Well, one theory is that people are confusing it with another movie called Kazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal as the genie, which was released in 1996. And yeah, I can see people getting confused about the name, but I mean, are all of these people really confusing Sinbad with Shaq? That doesn't really add up. I mean, it's possible, but what if there's a parallel universe where things are just slightly different, and in that universe, there really is a movie called Shazam starring Sinbad, and this very second, there's another version of me filming a video being like, damn, I could have sworn there was a movie called Kazam back in the 90s starring Shaq, but nobody can find it. Next up is Burmeasia, a whole island that completely vanished. This one's wild because it really was a real place, a tiny island in the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. You could find it on old maps, and even the Mexican government used to claim that it existed. In fact, it was officially documented as part of Mexico's territory, right in the area where they had a territorial dispute with the US over oil rights. Well, in 1997, a Mexican Navy survey came out saying the island was no longer there. They couldn't find it with any of their modern equipment, even though it was supposed to be there, of course. Having been marked on maps for hundreds of years, the island seemed to have just disappeared though. Well, your first thought is that it probably just sank into the ocean, but that's highly unlikely because the area was relatively shallow and there's actually no sign of the island ever having existed in the first place. So what are some other possibilities? Well, some people think it was deliberately erased from maps as part of some secret government deal. Others say cartographers had been wrong the entire time, and that the island was either never there or is a misidentified rock or sandbar that got labeled as an island. But there's a more fringe idea too, one that ties into the title of this video, of course. The idea that Burmeasia never existed in the first place, and what we're actually dealing with is a glitch or shift between parallel universes. Some say it's like the island slipped through the cracks of time and was never meant to be in our reality at all. Now let's talk about Flight 19, one of the most famous disappearances in aviation history, and of course, it's tied to the Bermuda Triangle. This incident goes back to December 5th of 1945. Flight 19 was a training mission for 5 US Navy bombers flying out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Everything was going well until something went horribly wrong. The pilots lost their bearings and they got disoriented. According to reports, they were never able to get a proper fix on their location, and things quickly went from bad to worse. One of the pilots even reported that the compass wasn't working right, but the entire squadron of 5 planes just vanished, like they were swallowed up by the ocean. No wreckage was ever found, and the Navy couldn't figure out exactly what happened. And on top of that, a rescue plane was sent out to search for them. That plane also went missing. No trace of it was ever found either. The story just adds more mystery when consider how much equipment was searching and still nothing showed up. People started speculating, of course. Some think it was probably a simple navigation error or mechanical failure, nothing too crazy, but others believe that the Bermuda Triangle was involved, that maybe this mysterious region of the ocean is some sort of portal or electromagnetic anomaly that messes with navigation systems, sucking planes and ships into some other dimension or an alternate reality. Others go even further, saying that UFOs or time warps are to blame, but at the end of the day, no one knows what really happened to Flight 19, which is exactly why it's still talked about to this day. The USS Cyclops was this massive American naval vessel that disappeared without a trace in 1918. It was carrying over 300 crew members and a hefty load of manganese ore from the Caribbean to Baltimore, and it vanished somewhere again in the Bermuda Triangle. It's one of the most baffling disappearances in naval history, and what makes it so mysterious is that this wasn't just a random ship lost at sea. It was a huge ship with a solid reputation. It was part of the US Navy during World War II. The Cyclops had been a workhorse for the Navy for years, but when it set out from Barbados in March of 1918, something obviously went wrong. It didn't check in when it was supposed to, and no one heard from it again. The ship was huge, 541 feet long, and it was designed to withstand the rough seas, so it's hard to believe it could just sink without a trace. No wreckage was ever found. Some think a freak storm or a mechanical failure could have caused it to sink. Others believe the ship was sabotaged, maybe by enemies during the war, but because the thing disappeared somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, some people of course think something stranger may have happened. In 1587, a group of English settlers landed on Rowan Oak Island, which is off the coast of modern-day North Carolina. They were sent to establish a permanent colony, but when a supply ship returned in 1590, they were gone, completely vanished. The settlement was empty, not a single person was left behind. There wasn't even any sign of a struggle. It was as if the whole colony had never even been there in the first place. But they had been. There was a clue that remained. The only sign of them was Croatoan, carved into a tree, the word. Now, the thing is, Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and also the name of a Native American tribe in the area. So, some believe the settlers may have tried to integrate with the tribe, but why would they leave behind such a cryptic message? Could they have been forced to leave by some hostile force, or did they just abandon the colony altogether? Maybe they just moved further inland, but then why did they leave no trace of where they went? Of course, there's also the theory that something much stranger happened. Some people wonder the settlers didn't vanish into the woods or the sea at all, but rather slipped into some other dimension, like a glitch in the fabric of time or space. Could Rowan Oak have been one of those spots in history where a tear in reality caused an entire settlement to disappear? Now, I will admit that this one may be a bit of a stretch, but I do think it's kind of fascinating, so I feel like it's worth adding here. You might not even know this, but at one point in US history there were $1,000 bills. The US Treasury printed $1,000 notes. These bills were mainly used for huge bank transfers and business deals, not something people would really carry around in their wallet. They were officially discontinued in 1969, along with other high-value bills like $500 and even $5,000 notes. But a lot of these old bills have just disappeared. The US Treasury estimates that millions of dollars worth of these $1,000 bills are still out there somewhere, but where? I mean, are they all hidden away in private collections? Maybe, but there are some conspiracy theories here too. Some believe that certain bills were deliberately destroyed or hidden by the government to keep the true extent of the nation's wealth under wraps. Others think that the bills might still be circulating under the radar in the hands of shadowy people in underground deals. Next is a very strange phenomenon called the Tal Hum, a low-frequency sound that can only be heard by a small percentage of people. But for those who do hear it, it's maddening. This hum is mostly heard around Taos, New Mexico, but there have been reports from all over the world of similar sounds in other locations like parts of England, Canada, and Japan. The hum is described as this low rumbling sound, like a distant diesel engine running constantly. But when investigators try to find the source, well, they can't. It's not coming from machinery or anything else that can be easily identified. People who hear it often report feeling headaches and insomnia though. Scientists have thrown out theories like tinnitus, which is an ear condition that can cause ringing in the ears, but this isn't really a ringing sound. Some wonder if the hum could be related to electromagnetic fields in the area or seismic activity in the Earth's crust, but some people believe Taos hum may be stranger, caused by interdimensional energy shifting through our world because of some tear in the fabric of reality, a hint of a parallel universe bleeding through. In 1966, two Brazilian men, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, were found dead on a hilltop wearing lead masks, the kind used to shield from radiation. A cop found their bodies after they'd gone missing. The men were lying side by side, there were no signs of a struggle, and there was a small bottle of water next to them. But the masks, well, nobody could figure out what those were about. They were also carrying a note that looked like instructions for some sort of ritual, mentioning radiation and how to use the masks. The whole thing made it seem like they were about to do some sort of experiment, but no one could figure out what. Were they part of some secret cult? Were they trying to contact aliens? Or were they mixed up in some government experiment? Nobody knows, and no one ever found out how they died. This has become a rather infamous story on Reddit. Always reminds me of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Inner Light. So this guy takes a hit to the head and blacks out. But instead of being out for a few seconds, the guy ends up living what feels like 10 full years in a completely different life. Entirely in his head, of course. course. In this other version of reality, he meets a woman, falls in love, settles down, starts a family. They go grocery shopping, they argue about bills, they play with their kids in the yard. He remembers what the weather was like. He remembers birthdays. I mean, we're talking real grounded stuff here. This doesn't sound like the type of wacky nonsense that goes on in dreams. It felt like real life. 10 years of it, mind you. But one day in that world, he starts noticing something strange. There's this lamp in the living room, totally normal looking, but it doesn't fit. It starts bugging him. It's like a little glitch. And the more he stares at it, the more everything else starts to feel wrong. And that's when it all starts unraveling. Suddenly he wakes up. He's lying on the ground, surrounded by people. He's back where he was right before he blacked out. Only minutes have passed. But the man is absolutely devastated. The life he just came back to doesn't feel right anymore. He remembers his wife and kids from the other world. He misses them. They weren't real though, but the emotions were. For a long time after, he struggled. He said it felt like he was mourning people who never existed. Now, was this a case of the brain doing weird things under stress? Or did he tap into something else, a different version of his life that's playing out somewhere, a parallel universe? Ken Korczak, a writer and journalist, had one of the most bizarre experiences, writing an article claiming that he'd slipped into a parallel universe. It wasn't like a whole new world, just a slightly different version of his own home and garden. He said the differences were subtle at first. His pets, specifically his cats and chickens, were behaving completely differently than he was used to. It's like they were the same animals, but something was just off about them, like seeing them through a different lens. In his words, it felt like everything in his yard was a few degrees askew. But the weirdest part came when he met this strange female entity. She wasn't human, at least not in the way you'd think. Korczak described her as resembling an elf or a fairy, and she seemed completely at home in this alternate reality. He also described feeling like she was there for a reason, like she was some kind of guide in this parallel world. He spent a lot of time reflecting on it, especially the strange, almost magical feeling of meeting this being. He genuinely believes that he had a real encounter with a parallel version of his home. As someone who's always been interested in the concept of alternate realities too, he dove deep, trying to make sense of it. Was this just a hallucination, or did he actually slip into another dimension for a brief moment? In December of 2024, Google made a pretty big announcement about their new quantum chip, Willow. This chip solved a problem in 5 minutes that would have taken even the fastest supercomputers 47 years. What was amazing here though wasn't just how fast the chip was, it's also what the head of Google's quantum AI team, Hartmut Nevins, said about it. He mentioned that this speed might be a sign that their quantum computers are pulling from multiple realities at once. Not just a throwaway comment, he was serious about this. This ties in with something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which states that every decision or event causes the universe to split into different versions, creating a parallel reality for each possibility. So when a quantum computer like Willow does a calculation, it's possible that it's tapping into these other universes, running all the possibilities at once, without us even realizing it. And it's not just Google talking along these lines. Other tech companies like IBM and D-Wave have been exploring quantum computing for years, and some think this technology could eventually lead us to understand or even interact with alternate realities. It's not quite science fiction anymore. Quantum computing might be the closest thing we've got to real-world proof that the multiverse could exist. So it's a sweltering day in July of 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. A man arrives on an international flight and walks up to customs. Everything seems routine. He looks European, speaks multiple languages, and has a legit-looking passport, from a distance that is. Looking at it up close, turns out this passport says he's from a country called Torrid. Never heard of it? Neither had the Japanese officials. They ask him to point it out on a map, and without hesitation he points to the area around where Andorra is, between France and Spain, but he's confused. He insists Torrid has been a country for over 1,000 years. The customs officers are confused, to say the least. Is this a joke? Is the guy just out of his mind? The guy seems just as confused as they are. His passport has stamps from other countries, including past visits to Japan, and he has multiple currencies in his wallet. He even mentions a business trip and says he's got meetings set up with a company in Tokyo. But when the officials call the company, they say they've never heard of him. Same story with the hotel that he claimed to have booked. At this point, they're really not sure what to do with him, so they put him up in a hotel room under guard for the night while they try to figure things out. But by the next morning, he's gone. The room was locked from the outside. There was no way out. At least none that the guards wouldn't have been able to see. To this day, no one knows who he was or where he came from, really. Some think he slipped into our world from another reality and then slipped right back out. Others think this whole story is just a good old-fashioned urban legend, but if we seriously consider the possibility that the multiverse really is a thing, well then this story starts to sound a little less outlandish. The Marawasi Stone Forest in Peru is one of those places that seems to have a ton of weird stuff happening. People have been talking about strange occurrences there for years, mostly because the place was filled with these huge stone structures that look like they belong to some ancient civilization. But there are also some strange stories surrounding this place. Well, one goes that a group of hikers got a lot more than they bargained for when they camped here. While hanging out, they started to hear some music coming from what seemed like a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It sounded like a celebration. The group looked around and sure enough, they spotted a stone cabin lit up from the inside and they could see people dancing through the windows. The people were dressed like they were from the 1600s, all in old-fashioned clothes. Naturally, one of the hikers decided to check things out. She got closer to the cabin, and the closer she got, the stranger things became. Her friend noticed that she was acting off, like her body was stiff and she wasn't walking right. Got even weirder when she suddenly couldn't move her arm, like she was partially paralyzed. They managed to pull her away from the cabin and she snapped out of it right away. People who know the area say the Marawasi might be some kind of doorway between dimensions or timelines. The idea is that certain spots on Earth might have thin barriers to other worlds, and that cabin could have been a glimpse into some different time. This story comes from a Reddit user named Albert Norman 2069, who shared an experience that left him questioning everything about the world. It had all started on June 28, 2014, a day that seemed normal at first. He'd woken up, brushed his teeth, ate breakfast, and headed out to work. But as he turned on the car radio, something wasn't right. Instead of the usual music, the station was airing a talk show. The host was excitedly talking about something called Victory in the Great War and praising the troops for their role in this victory. At first, the Redditor thought maybe it was some kind of special segment, but the more the host went on, the stranger things got. There was talk of a victory in Italy and something about the Second Great Depression finally coming to an end. He was confused, but he ended up brushing things off. It was probably just fictional. But then things started getting even stranger when he was at work. During lunch, he overheard his coworkers talking about the same victory in Italy, and they kept mentioning the numbers 33 to 13. When he asked what they were talking about, they acted like he was the odd one for not knowing. And when he asked about a coworker named Sam, who didn't seem to be there, no one seemed to remember it. At least something was very off. On his way home, he decided to take a different route to avoid traffic, and that's when he noticed that the city looked worse than he remembered. Buildings were crumbling, some were abandoned, and there were banners everywhere again celebrating this mysterious victory. When he finally got home, he flicked on the news. The anchors were talking about the victory in Italy and how the US was dealing with a war abroad. Europe was also in chaos, and the US was in an even worse depression than the 1930s. Of course, things went back to normal by the next day. So was it just a really vivid dream? Well, possibly. But perhaps Albert Norman 2069 really did spend a day in a much darker version of our own reality. Next up are some pretty strange cave paintings, the Wanjinas, some of the most mysterious and downright eerie cave art on Earth. These ancient paintings are found in the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, painted by Aboriginal tribes whose culture has been going strong for over 60,000 years. The Wanjinas, according to legend, were sky beings, spirits from the clouds who came down during dream time, said to be this time when the Earth was still being formed. These beings supposedly created the land, animals, people, everything. They taught the Aboriginals how to live, and then they vanished. Some say they returned to the stars, others say they went underground. But, I mean, just look at these cave paintings, the big black eyes, the pale skin, they look like aliens. But this art is estimated to be tens of thousands of years old, long before anyone was talking about aliens, at least not in the modern sense. Kinda makes you wonder, are the Wanjinas more than just myth? Did these ancient tribes actually encounter something from beyond the stars? Or maybe even from a parallel reality. This final story comes from Reddit user GoodResolve33 and goes as follows. When I was younger, my cousins and I would play in my aunt's basement during major holiday parties. Parents would be upstairs and we would all just hang out and mess around in the basement, entertaining ourselves with whatever junk was down there. Well, there was a metal door down there with a bolt lock that we never touched. But one day, we unlocked the door and we saw a major boxing event going on. I'm talking Jumbotron, bright lights, arena, and a major crowd. Everything seemed to freeze when we opened the door though. People in the crowd turned around to look at us. Fighters stopped fighting, the referee signaled us out, and we saw shadows in the crowd running toward us. It all sounds crazy, but I remember how scared we were. We shut the door, ran upstairs, and sat in the living room with our parents. I remember them being like, "What's going on with these guys?" As we sat in the living room silent, crapping ourselves because we thought we were going to get in trouble. Fast forward to much later, I tried to tell my parents and they swear that I imagined it. I thought I did too for the longest time until randomly one of my cousins from that day hit me up after so long of not communicating, only to bring up that same event, detail for detail as I described and remembered it. I go back to that house to check out the door. Across the door is the neighbor's basement door, since it was a duplex, and stairs leading up the metal basement doors that come out to the backyard. Not sure what the F that was, and I promise you I'm not that crazy. I get goosebumps thinking about the situation sometimes because it makes absolutely zero sense.
Starting off this list today, we have the disappearance of the L8 blimp crew. The L8 blimp incident remains one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries from World War II. The blimp was initially on a patrol mission to scout for enemy submarines along the California coast. As it returned, something very unforeseen occurred. Observers on the ground noticed the blimp's erratic behavior before its descent, yet no distress signals were sent from the crew. Upon investigation, all control systems within the blimp were found operational, and personal belongings of the crew were still on board, suggesting a very sudden and unexplained disappearance. What makes this case even more intriguing is that the blimp managed to navigate and land in a densely populated area without causing significant damage or injury, almost as if it were being controlled or guided by unseen hands. The absence of any struggle or attempt to communicate by the crew has fueled speculation about paranormal activities, including theories of abduction or unintentional travel to another dimension. Despite various investigations and inquiries, no conclusive explanation has been provided, leaving the fate of the crew a mystery and a source of speculation about the potential for anomalies or breaches in our understanding of space and time. Next up on our list today, we have the Liverpool time slips. So this is something I didn't know, but apparently there is a phenomenon of time slips in Liverpool, particularly around the area known as Bold Street. These experiences typically involve individuals or groups of people feeling as though they have momentarily stepped back in time, encountering surroundings, people, and objects that appear to be from a different era. In the case of a policeman named Frank, he described seeing cars, fashion, and shop fronts that were all distinctly from the 1960s, a very stark contrast to the 1990s environment that he had come from. Even more intriguingly, upon returning to the present, he could find no logical explanation for his experience, as everything in his surroundings had returned to normal. Such incidents raise questions about the nature of time and reality. Are these time slips just hallucinations, or do they offer a glimpse into a parallel universe or an alternate reality that momentarily overlaps with our own? While definitive scientific explanations remain elusive, these experiences continue to provoke curiosity, suggesting a world that is much more complex and mysterious than our conventional understanding may allow. Next up, we have the mystery of Gadanton Canyon. In 1972, the journey of 4 university women took an eerie turn when they opted for a shortcut through Gadanton Canyon, hoping to shorten their trip back to Southern Utah University from Nevada. As they ventured deep into the canyon, the familiar desert landscape transformed inexplicably into an alien terrain, marked by an unsettling quiet that blanketed the area. The road beneath them changed to gravel, and the surroundings became increasingly unfamiliar and very foreboding. The group encountered structures that defied conventional architecture, featuring angles and materials that seemed out of place and time. Most unsettling were the egg-shaped vehicles with elongated, opaque windows, unlike any cars or machinery known at the time, seemingly parked or abandoned. These elements contributed to a palpable sense of dislocation, and there was an overwhelming sense of dread. Despite the urge to explore or understand their bizarre surroundings, fear and survival instincts prevailed, prompting the girls to get out of there as fast as humanly possible. Miraculously, as they retraced their route, the surreal landscape gave way to the familiar high desert scenery of southern Utah, though no clear boundary marked the transition. Subsequent attempts to locate the strange road and its surroundings ended in vain, as no maps or local accounts could verify the existence of the places and objects they reported seeing. This very strange experience led the women, and those who later heard their story, to speculate that they might have inadvertently crossed into a parallel dimension, a brief glimpse into an alternate reality abruptly encountered and then left behind. Next up today we have the Vanishing Hotel. A French couple traveling in the 1970s decided to stay at a quaint, seemingly out-of-place hotel in the countryside. The hotel and its staff appeared to belong to an earlier time, and the couple noted peculiarities such as the absence of telephones or modern amenities. I feel like that's a really big red flag. I don't know. No telephones at a hotel? What is this, Norman Bates? Upon trying to find the hotel again on a subsequent trip, it was nowhere to be found, and no one in the area could recall its existence, suggesting a possible slip into a parallel world. At our halfway point today, we have the interdimensional ring. A person reported finding a very unique ring that did not belong to them in their home. Despite thorough investigations, they could not trace the ring's origins or how it came into their possession. You just know that somebody in that household was getting accused of cheating in that moment. The mysterious ring appeared to possess unusual characteristics and design unlike any common jewelry. Its style did not match any known era or culture, which only deepened the mystery surrounding it. As the person wore the ring, peculiar incidents began to unfold. Objects in their home seemed to move independently, and time appeared to distort, with hours passing in what felt like minutes. On several occasions, the wearer claimed to see fleeting glimpses of otherworldly landscapes or to hear whispers in an unrecognizable language. These experiences intensified the belief that the ring was not merely an object of unknown provenance, but a conduit to parallel dimensions, offering brief, disorienting peeks into these alternate realities that coexist with our own. Would you want a ring with that kind of power, or would you journey across the land to destroy it in a fiery pit? Next up we have the flight into the future. In the 1930s, a British pilot claimed to have flown into a cloud bank only to emerge in what seemed to be the future. He described seeing unfamiliar aircraft and an altered landscape, but upon returning to his own time, he reported the incident, but unfortunately there was just no evidence to substantiate his experience. This story has been interpreted by some as a possible encounter with a time slip or a parallel dimension, but to me it really is just giving Manifest. I don't know if you guys have seen that show, but it's crazy, and I feel like maybe that show was based on what happened here. I don't know. Next up today we have the quantum thought exercise, which is simultaneously my favorite and least favorite on this entire list, because it stresses me out. While not an anecdote of an actual event, the quantum thought experiment is often associated with the idea of quantum immortality and is related to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Imagine a situation similar to the Schrodinger's cat experiment, where a physicist uses a potentially lethal mechanism that is triggered or not triggered based on a quantum event, like the decay of a radioactive atom. Okay, I know it sounds confusing. Stay with me, alright? In this thought experiment, every time the mechanism has a chance to be triggered, the universe would split, creating one reality where the physicist survives and another where they do not. However, the physicist, as an observer, would only ever experience the outcomes where they survive, hence the term quantum immortality. They would seemingly jump from one universe to another where they continue living, never experiencing their own death. The idea here is that, from the physicist's perspective, they might feel as though they are transitioning into different parallel universes where they continue to exist. It is a very mind-bending concept that suggests that our consciousness could persist in a multiverse, experiencing only those branches of reality where we survive. It's interesting, scary, unsettling, I don't know, that's just how I feel about this one. We have the alternate phases of Highway 167. There are accounts of people driving on familiar roads only to find themselves in completely unfamiliar landscapes or towns that just should not exist along their route. One particular story involves Highway 167, where drivers reported entering foggy patches and emerging into surroundings that appeared to be from a different time period or just a completely different reality, only to return to their known world upon retracing their route. It's just so creepy. I feel like we've talked about like a few specific scenarios that kind of deal with the same thing before. Just is so unsettling. I don't know, there's just something weird about that. Next up, we have the man who woke up in a different marriage. This story is about a man who claimed to have woken up next to a woman he recognized, but in a life that wasn't his. He had memories of life with another woman, his actual wife, but in this new reality he was married to an old girlfriend. His job was different, and even his car in the driveway was not the one that he remembered. Despite extensive searches, he found no evidence of his former life and began to question his sanity until he suddenly returned to his original world with everything back to normal. This does sound like an absolute nightmare, but it also, like, you know, sometimes people think like, what would have happened if like things went this way or whatever, so maybe it would be kind of cool to get like a glimpse. Okay, and finally today we have the non-existent hotel, back with another strange hotel experience. This one starts off with a businessman traveling in Europe in the 1970s who claims to have stayed at a beautiful old-fashioned hotel. Nothing wrong with that. Upon returning to the city years later, he was unable to find the hotel. In fact, there were actually no records or evidence that it ever even existed. He even checked his old receipts and documents, which all referenced the hotel, yet no one in the city had any memory of such a place. This led him to believe that he might have spent a night in a parallel dimension. Imagine, you went to this mystery hotel and later realized you were staying in room 1408. Could you imagine? Oh, I would think that my whole life was a lie after that.
And we're starting things off with a very eerie story posted to Reddit by Flarengo, who writes, "This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend up and he wasn't home, so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, 'Hey, it's me. Sorry, I missed you. Call you later. Bye.' And then I hung up and left the house. I made no other calls. Later that day, he called back and he says, 'Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who is that girl you were talking to?' And I was like, 'What are you talking about? I wasn't talking to any girl.' Well, as it turns out, the message didn't end after I said bye. I had to go over to his house and listen to this message a few times. After my initial message that I did leave, as quoted above, there was a slight pause and it continues on for another 30 to 40 seconds or so with me talking to some girl. It was my voice, but a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I didn't recognize. You can compare it to the message I know I did leave, and the two voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice, but, you know, talking mannerisms. It was my voice. Also, references to my occupation and activities were the same. Basically, in this conversation, I was talking to this girl about going skiing, but I had to go down to my shop and work on a car first, which totally correlated to me. Then the message just stopped. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that recorded the message to a chip, so there was no tape I could have taken and analyzed, unfortunately. Also, neither I nor my friend had party lines, so that's not an explanation. It was very freaky. I can't explain it. This next post was by Ninx Time, who writes about a time he may have seen parallel universe versions of his own family. The story goes like this. Around the age of 11, my family decided to go and visit my grandparents, and while we were there, I decided to go out and play around for a bit. They lived in a flat in the middle of the city. They had a road that had stores and a car park on the right, and had enough space for me to play around with my friends that lived there. As I got down and ran to that car park, a car went past that nearly crashed into me, and in that car, there were 3 passengers. A woman, her daughter, and a male driver. As I dodged that car, they looked like they had no emotions whatsoever and looked really dull. And as I focused into the car, the male driver was my dad. Very easily distinctive. And the car was our car. Same color, same car plates, same everything. I instantly ran to our car, thinking it had been stolen, but our car was sitting right there. I turned around to follow the car that nearly hit me, but it was no longer there. I ran upstairs to my grandparents' house without knowing what to do or what to say. Luckily, my sister was right by the door, and I told her the story and what I saw. She just laughed, telling me that my dad hadn't left the house yet. Next up, we have a post with the heading, Sudden and Short Shift into Parallel Universe by BB Shuri, which goes as follows. I was very much in love with a guy, and one day we were hanging out in his car, just chilling. He was telling me a story about his nephew who had a schizophrenic episode or something, and I was just listening, totally into the story, when suddenly I found myself sitting in a different car with him. This specific car was an old timer, and I had a wedding dress on. He had on a tuxedo. I remember feeling so happy and elevated, and he was a little bit grumpy because we were waiting for someone and there was this time pressure. We had to be at the venue. The scene lasted maybe 5 seconds, but everything was so real. I could feel the air, the atmosphere. I could feel my wedding dress, the temperature, the emotion, everything. I remember looking outside the window and seeing that we were parked beside a building, and the person we were waiting for was in the building. The building was on a hill, surrounded by nature. In a snap, I was back in the regular car with him, right at the moment he was finishing his story. I have no idea what he told me. At the time, I didn't know what the frig just happened, but now I can maybe see it as a glitch into a parallel universe where we did get married. Next Reddit user is NYZ312, who discusses a very strange incident when they may have died and shown up in another timeline. They write, I've never really discussed this with anyone, but thought this may be the place to at least see what you think. I was driving down a street that is somewhat busy, 4 lanes, 2 each way, and there was a light rain. I came to a light that I wanted to turn left, across traffic. There's no dedicated turning lane. I waited till I thought it was clear, but just as I turned left, someone came around the inner opposite lane and I could see we were going to collide. I closed my eyes. The next thing I knew, I was on the street I intended to turn on, 2 blocks up, on the side of the street, just sitting there, no collision. I gathered myself and went on, but I think about it a lot. My scar is on the wrong side, posted by Charming Medium. This will sound weird, but I had to share this, so I'll explain. When I was very young, I was diagnosed with leukemia. I'm now cancer-free, thankfully, but back then I had a port cath installed. It was on my left side. It was always on my left side. Once it was removed, I had a scar on my left side. I don't know how or when, but the scar is now on my right side. I can't even begin to explain how. About 3 years ago, I remember looking at my left side and being unable to find it. I looked around to see where it may have moved, but I couldn't find it. I eventually forgot about it. And sometime last year when I got out of the shower, I noticed it. It was on my right side. I asked my grandmother about it. I asked what side my port was on. As expected, she said it was my left. And she was just as confused as I was about it being on my right side. It still bothers me. And I think about it sometimes. It makes me uneasy in a way I can't explain. I always joked about the whole glitch in the Matrix stuff, the Mandela effect and everything. I don't know what to think anymore. Posted to Reddit by Balthazar, she writes about a disturbing incident she had in class that led to a series of disturbing dreams. It started around the time I had just gotten into high school. So around the time I was about 12 to 13, I guess. It was register period on the first day back after school holidays. We all wait for our names to be read and each of us reply. The teacher reads out a name and nobody answers. Out of nowhere, I get this feeling like someone just ripped my stomach out and replaced it with ice cubes. I find it odd, but I can't shake the feeling. Anyway, about 5 minutes later, another new student enters the class and my jaw almost drops. Except for having red hair, she could have been my twin. The teacher sits her near me and I can't stop staring. She notices me and looks just as astonished. We begin a conversation, but the uneasy feeling stays with me. About 10 minutes later, the principal walks into the classroom, and I freeze and clutch the desk. Here it comes. The teacher notices and walks over to the principal. They lean in together and he whispers something to her. She nods and he steps forward facing class. "I'm sorry, class, but Miss X," the girl not present at register that morning, "has passed away over the holidays. She took her own life." I tuned out for the rest of what she said and just started crying uncontrollably, and that set off the rest of the class. The dreams started after this. I cannot say why, as I don't know. To go into each and every specific dream would be insanity. It's a very detailed. Let's just say when people I have had contact with, no matter how briefly in life, are about to die, I dream their deaths about 3 days beforehand. I will simply state that it is not possible to be mere coincidence based on how many people's deaths I have dreamt. 2 colleagues I have worked with, 3 grandparents, 1 great-grandfather, 1 friend's grandfather, 2 school teachers, 1 lady I met briefly for 5 minutes one day at work, at least 3 friends, all dead within 3 days of my dreams. Make of it what you will. This next post is called "I May Have Saved My Dad in Another Universe." It was posted by Karina Nebula 89, and it reads, "My dad died a year ago, and a few months later, I had a dream that felt as real as reality, being wide awake. He was alive in that dream, and I was very confused about that. I remembered the police report I read. He died in his apartment, luckily, seemingly in his sleep, and the police had to break in. He lived in a social house building in which they checked the tenants daily. When he didn't open the door, they called the police. I remembered the time of death on the police report, and in that dream, that time of date had not happened yet. Another reason why this dream felt so real. I could see dates and everything on my phone clearly. Everything was logical, and time passed normally, like it would while being awake. But the time was approaching. I made a plan to get him to the hospital, but he was taking his sweet time getting ready, and I was getting anxious because I knew the time of death was soon, but he did not really get why I was getting so serious about leaving. Eventually I checked my phone again, and the time was right after the time of death on the police report, and my dad was still alive and well. I was baffled. He still went to the hospital, but while he was on the way there, I woke up. This next post is from Witty Turnover 5585 and reads, "So I'm scrolling YouTube a little bit ago and see a video titled The 11-Day Disappearance of Agatha Christie, and I thought it was a mistake, so I watched the video and a few others to see, sure enough, she was only missing for 11 days. But I vividly remember my favorite show growing up, Unsolved Mysteries, having an episode about her disappearance. And in this episode, she kisses her daughter, walks out the back door, and vanishes, never to be seen again. I thought at the time it was weird because I'd learned about her in school and had to do a book report at one time. So I searched for this particular episode, and there is one of her, but again, she was only gone for 11 days. I think I skipped universes at some point because that's not the history where I'm from. Anyone else have something similar happen? Next up, we have a post by Naoiyyii. Don't know how to pronounce that. It's entitled, "My Maybe Experience in a Different Universe." It was in the middle of the night and I had just woke up. I don't know why I woke up, but I was up. I felt weird. I felt like it was super quiet, like too quiet. I know it was the middle of the night, but it was weird. I felt like everything was down in scale, like my room was smaller, my bed was smaller, and everything was. I was so confused. It was also pitch black outside, like no lights at all. It was weird, and I started crying and ran to my mom's room. My mom was looking at me weird, and she asks me what's wrong. I told her I don't know where I am with a crying tone, and she just looked at me like I'm crazy. She told me I can lay with her if I want. I was 11 at the time, and I won't forget it. I swear everything was too quiet and dark. When I woke up, I felt completely normal, and it seemed like nothing had happened. My mom also, for some reason, didn't even know I went into her room that night. But maybe she was just too tired to remember. And finally, we have a Reddit post by EqualStance99 entitled, "Shirt suddenly went missing and then appeared a few days later." Hi, I've had a few encounters throughout my life that are mostly explainable using logic. However, I cannot find any explanation to this experience. I took some pants and shirt out of my cupboard and put them on my bed to get dressed. I turned around, closed the cupboard, but when I turned back around to get dressed, the shirt was just missing. I searched everywhere, but I just couldn't find it. Yesterday, the shirt appeared back in my cupboard, neatly folded, as if I had never touched it. I am positive that I didn't miss it, because upon its return, it was on the top of all my shirts, and no other one is that color. I am beyond bewildered at this simple yet unexplainable occurrence. In 1851, a man calling himself Jopar Voren was picked up by local authorities in the town of Frankfurt Oder, in what was then Prussia. He didn't speak German fluently, but he understood it well enough to communicate, and what he told them left everyone confused. He claimed to be from a country called Luxaria, which he said was in a region called Sacria, supposedly somewhere in the Eastern Hemisphere. Never heard of it? Well, yeah, nobody else did either. It wasn't on any map, it wasn't part of any empire, and it never has been. It didn't exist. But Jopar was dead serious. He said he was searching for his long-lost brother, and when asked to show his documents, he produced papers written in a completely unknown language. He also claimed to be fluent in multiple languages, some of which had no record of ever existing either, like Luxarian and Abramian. Eventually, authorities labeled him a lunatic and sent him off for further investigation, and that's the last the world ever heard of him. There was never any follow-up. If this guy ever really did exist, he probably ended up in an asylum, and if you know anything about mental institutions at the time, you know they were basically hell on earth. Makes sense he was never heard from again. Was this guy mentally unstable though, or is there really a chance that he somehow slipped from an alternate reality, a different version of Earth where Luxaria was as real as Germany? And in this alternate Earth, is there a more handsome version of me doing a video just like this, but talking about how Jopar Voren mysteriously vanished into thin air and was never seen again? In the heart of Liverpool, there's a street called Bold Street. Nothing crazy at first glance, just shops, cafes, people going about their day, but ask around and you'll likely hear whispers about something very strange. People slipping through time. One of the most famous stories comes from 1996. A guy named Frank was walking with his wife near Bold Street. She popped into a bookstore and he strolled ahead to a music shop. As he crossed the street, everything suddenly changed. Modern cars vanished, the noises around him dulled, and when he looked around, he was standing in what looked like 1950s Liverpool. People were dressed in post-war clothes, and there were old-school shop fronts where modern businesses should have been. He even saw a store called Crips, which hadn't existed in decades. A few moments later, the world flickered again, and he was back in the present like nothing had happened. Frank swore that this happened though, and he's not the only one. There are dozens of reports from people who say they've walked Bold Street and wound up in the past. Some just for a few seconds, others for minutes. Is it just a coincidence, hallucinations, or is Bold Street sitting on some kind of weird wrinkle in time, a natural glitch in the matrix, if you will? In 1979, two British couples, Geoff and Pauline Simpson and Len and Cynthia Gisby, were driving through France on their way to a holiday in Spain. While passing through Paris, they decided to stop for the night. They pulled off the main road and found this charming, old-fashioned hotel. Nothing fancy, but it was cozy and heavy wooden furniture. No modern conveniences though, like none. The beds didn't have pillows even, it was just bolsters. The windows had these old wooden shutters, odd but charming in a vintage kind of way. They even had dinner at the attached restaurant, where they were served a very basic, kind of old school meal by staff in these outdated uniforms. The whole night also only cost them about 19 francs. total. That's about $21.50 US. Even in the 70s, that was suspiciously cheap. They tried to find the hotel again on their way back through Paris, but it was gone completely. They retraced their route. They asked locals. Nobody had ever heard of this place, though. The road they remembered taking didn't seem to exist anymore. They later checked their photos from the trip, but the ones they took of the hotel were gone. They just weren't there. But both couples swore up and down that this was real. So, did they spend the night in a building that slipped forward through time, or did they slip backward into some echo of a Paris that no longer was there? In 2009, a guy named James Richards claimed he had a very weird experience in California. According to him, he was out driving near Gadanton Canyon with his dog when it took off chasing a rabbit. He ran after it, tripped, hit his head, and blacked out. When he came to, he was in what looked like a regular room with furniture, but there were also machines he didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as Jonas and said that while on a work-related trip from a dimensional travel agency, he had used the machine to transport the unconscious Richards to this parallel Earth in order to help him. This alternate version of Earth was very similar to ours, but with some key differences. One being that in Jonas's world, the Beatles were all still alive and making music. Naturally, James didn't believe it until Jonas gave him a cassette tape. The label said Everyday Chemistry was a compilation of Beatles songs that didn't exist here. James brought the tape back with him when he returned to our world, and he posted the whole thing on a website he made. The music's on there. It does kind of sound like the Beatles' version of like Pink Floyd's Division Bell, you know, like just music they would have done in their later years. Is this just a really creative art project or a hoax though? Or is there a chance there's really a whole Beatles album online from a parallel universe? Back in the 12th century, the quiet village of Woolpit in England got a visit from two very strange kids. A brother and sister showed up out of nowhere, looking completely lost. They were also bright green, not a sickly green, I mean kind of like Shrek hue. The locals were kind of freaked out, but they took them in. The kids didn't speak any recognizable language. They were terrified of sunlight, and they refused to eat anything except raw beans for days. Now eventually they adjusted a bit. The boy unfortunately got sick and died not long after, but the girl survived and slowly learned to speak English. And that's when she started telling people some pretty strange things. She said they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where everything had a greenish twilight, and the sun never fully shone. According to her, the two of them had been tending to their father's flock when they heard this loud noise and suddenly found themselves in Woolpit. Were these mysterious green children from some different culture and just got lost, or had they somehow wandered out of a parallel world? In 1957, something terrible happened in the quiet town of Hexham, England. Two sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were hit by a car and killed while walking to church. Their parents, understandably, were devastated, but about a year later, the mother got pregnant again, and in 1958, she gave birth to twins again. Jillian and Jennifer, they named them. Now, from the start, there were some odd things. Jennifer had birthmarks in the exact same place as Jacqueline had them, and as they got older, the twins started asking for toys that had belonged to their dead sisters, toys they'd never seen before. They even knew their names. They also seemed to have memories of places they'd never been, like a school the older girls had attended. One time the twins pointed out a park they claimed to recognize, saying, "That's where we used to play." By the time they turned 5, though, the memories began to fade. The girls grew up like normal kids, eventually forgetting all the strange things they used to say, but their father became convinced that Joanna and Jacqueline had been reincarnated into their twin sisters. Was it a case of parental grief mixing with coincidence, or did something actually transfer over? Like two souls refusing to move on, jumping right back into the same family. A lot of people who've heard this story kinda think so. And that's why the story of the Pollock twins became one of the most famous reincarnation cases ever recorded. In 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was driving home late at night in Minnesota when his car went into a ditch near the town of Lind. He wasn't hurt, he was just stuck, so he called his parents around 1:30 a.m. and asked them to come get him. He said he was near Lind, When they drove out there, they couldn't find him. He stayed on the phone with them for nearly 47 minutes, calmly describing where he was walking. Then suddenly, in the middle of the call, Brandon said, "Oh sh," and the line went dead. That was the last time anyone heard from him. His car was eventually found, but they never found a body, and to this day, Brandon Swanson's disappearance remains completely unsolved. In 1901, two English school teachers, Anne Moberly and Charlotte Jourdain, took a trip to Paris. While visiting the Palace of Versailles, they decided to explore the gardens near the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's old stomping grounds. But as they wandered, something felt kinda off. The air got heavy, the atmosphere changed. The people they passed were suddenly wearing 18th century clothing. One man in a wide brim hat looked downright ghostly even. They claimed the place felt lifeless and surreal, like walking into a painting. But then, out of nowhere, everything snapped back to normal. Later, they became convinced that they had time-slipped straight into pre-revolution France, possibly 1792. They even claimed to have seen Marie Antoinette herself sketching by the grass. They wrote a book about it under fake names, and the story became relatively famous. Some believed it, some said they were just delusional or making it up entirely, but both women stuck to their story for the rest of their lives. Were they hallucinating, or did they somehow catch a rip in time and stumble into the past? There's a patch over the South Atlantic Ocean called the South Atlantic Anomaly, and it's kinda like the Bermuda Triangle but for space. So satellites that pass over it glitch out. Laptops on the International Space Station will sometimes crash. Astronauts report seeing flashes of light even when their eyes are closed. Why? Because in this spot, Earth's magnetic field is weirdly weak, like dangerously weak, which allows more cosmic radiation to pour in. NASA even has to shut off instruments when passing over it because they can't guarantee accurate readings. Some satellites have flat out died after taking too many passes, and here's the freakiest part: the anomaly seems to be growing and splitting. And conspiracy theorists, they got plenty of theories. Ancient alien tech buried under the ocean, a secret underground base, a rift to another dimension, possibly.
Starting off this list at number 10. This story goes that a couple were at home just doing some household chores when something super strange happened to them. The husband went to open the front door to toss a dirty rug out of the house, and it was completely pitch black outside. The weird part is that it was 2 p.m. and from inside the house it looked like a regular sunny afternoon with light coming in from the windows. They said that suddenly outside the front door where it was dark, it's like the sun was a light bulb and it went on, then off again, and then on. They described it like the flickering a light bulb does right before it's burnt out. The wife asked the husband if he had seen that, and he replied, "Yes, what just happened?" They also said that there weren't any clouds out either, so it couldn't have been a cloud blocking the sky. Were they transported to some alternate reality for a second? I honestly have no explanation for what the pair witnessed. Moving on to number 9. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. This story comes from a Reddit user called RunnerGirl2001. RunnerGirl was trying to get over an ex when their friend Maggie texted asking if they would be open to going on a date with a mutual friend named Audrey. RunnerGirl accepted and tried to talk with Audrey, but didn't really feel a strong connection and felt like maybe they just weren't meant to be. Shortly after this, more friends began texting RunnerGirl about Audrey, even though they didn't really want to keep seeing her. Later that day, RunnerGirl ended up zoning out in light traffic and was close to getting in a car accident. They were halfway into the intersection when they realized that they had run a red light, and at the moment they realized they saw a car swerve to not hit them. RunnerGirl pulled over after this to process what just happened, and after this specific moment, RunnerGirl's friends never mentioned Audrey again. A few months later, Audrey began dating someone else in the friend group named Jake, so RunnerGirl assumed that this was why they stopped bringing up Audrey. A few months later, RunnerGirl ended up bringing up Audrey to Maggie and brings up how Maggie had tried to set them up. Maggie was super confused for saying, "No, we were trying to set Audrey up with Jake." When RunnerGirl went back to their text messages, they couldn't find any that mentioned Audrey at all. In the near-miss car accident, did RunnerGirl somehow end up jumping into another dimension? Moving on to number 8. One day a person, let's call them Taylor, was watching TV with their mom and brother while their sister and dad went out to run some errands. While they were watching TV, an ad for a show comes on the screen, and it was one of those veterinary shows. Taylor's brother immediately recognized the vet on screen as his old track and field coach. The brother knew that he was a vet, but didn't know that he was now on a TV show. Taylor had never met the coach before, but obviously thought this story was cool. Later, when Taylor's dad and sister returned home, Taylor went to tell their sister about the TV show mishap. Taylor's sister had also never met this track coach, and Taylor begins to tell the story and asks if she remembers the old coach who had a vet clinic. Taylor's sister replies, "The funny one with the mustache?" Taylor is confused since she's never met him, so asks how she would know he had a funny mustache. Taylor's sister replies and says that Taylor told her about the coach earlier that morning. This of course totally freaked Taylor out because they didn't know what the coach looked like that morning, and also they definitely do not remember having this conversation because why would anyone bring up their brother's old track coach without a reason? I'm not exactly sure what happened here, but something weird is definitely going on. Moving on to number 7. This story comes from a person who often commutes to a town around 3 hours away from the one that they live in. One day they were doing the 3-hour drive with their mom, and they got to this part that takes most of the drive, and it's an area with a lot of mountains and cliffs. They are in the passenger seat with their mom driving, and as they look out the side of the window over one of the cliffs, they see a small community that they had never seen before. This community looked nice and consisted of mostly bungalows, which is apparently not normal for the area. Both them and their mom were super confused as to how they had never seen this community before, but it gets even weirder. They never saw the community again. It just disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Did they accidentally drive into another dimension one day? Moving on to number 6. So one day, this person was driving to work on the same route that they took every single day. They worked the whole day through and got into their car to head back home on that same path. As they were driving, they started feeling super anxious and like on the verge of a panic attack. They kept driving, and then suddenly they see this huge power plant all lit up. They're super confused because they drive this road every single day. How could they possibly miss this glaringly obvious thing? Then their boyfriend calls and asks them to pick up McDonald's on the way home. No problem, they go to the drive-thru. When they get to the window, they see an employee that they've never seen before, even though they're at the same McDonald's almost every single day because you've got to get those chicken nuggets. And this new employee is the only one there and says that they've been working there for around 2 months. They take the food and head home, and when they get there, they begin to tell the boyfriend about this strange power plant that they just saw. The boyfriend explains that the power plant has always been there, so he doesn't know what they're talking about. Now every day they drive past this power plant with no idea how it got there or how they had missed it, but they've also noticed a few other small differences in their life. Their dog doesn't know tricks it used to know, and their boyfriend pronounces some words differently than before. Maybe on their drive home they slipped into a new dimension. Moving on to number 5. This story starts when a person received a camera as an early birthday gift, but there was no SD card in the camera. When they got home, they threw an older SD card into the camera and began to see old pictures and videos that they had totally forgotten about. As they were scrolling through the pictures, they realized that one was a video of their mom with one of their old dogs who had passed away. This was obviously such a treat to see this video that they forgot even existed, and to be able to see their dog once again. They switched to another SD card to see if there were any more hidden gems that they had forgotten about, but unfortunately the other SD card didn't really contain much. When they switched back to the original SD card, they saw the thumbnail for the video with the dog. They selected it, but when it went to load, the screen just suddenly looked like it was cracked all over. They backed out of the thumbnail, and then the entire video just completely disappeared, as well as the fact that now the brand new camera screen was just all messed up. While looking through SD cards, did the camera somehow transport them into an alternate reality where that video was taken? I don't know. This whole situation is super weird. Moving on to number 4. This story comes from a person who works at a retirement home, so they have to get a weekly COVID test. The test takes place in a building farthest from the building that they actually work in, so they drove their car over to the test, parked their car on the lot, but left it running since the test was routine and super quick and easy. At the test, they saw a friend of theirs and offered them a ride back to the building that they worked in. The pair headed out to the lot and realized that their car was still running, but the doors were locked. They searched their pockets to make sure that they didn't have a key, but since the car was still running, this obviously wasn't possible and there was no spare key for the car, so they ended up calling a locksmith to come and help them out. The pair waited inside the testing building until the locksmith arrived. When he got there, they went out to the car and realized it wasn't running anymore. They thought maybe it had run out of gas or maybe the battery had died, but they felt like it hadn't been that long. The locksmith opened the car door, and when they reached in for the keys, they realized that they weren't in the ignition. This shocked them both because the car was definitely on earlier when they realized that they were locked out. They went to walk back into the testing center to look in there, and after taking a couple steps, they heard the keys jingle in their pocket. The same pockets that they had checked before. Where did these keys come from? Because they definitely weren't in there before, and now they have to pay a locksmith $200 for no reason. Coming in at number 3, this one is another dog story and starts off with a woman who we'll call Anna having her bi-weekly phone call with her mom just to catch up and see what's going on. Anna's mom unfortunately had to inform her that Anna's sister's dog named Honey had passed away. Anna was obviously super upset at this loss and called her sister to check in after hearing the news. Anna had tons of questions about where they were planning to bury the dog, as well as how her sister's son was doing with the loss. Anna told her boyfriend how upset she was about the loss of the dog, as they had a really strong bond. Flash forward a couple months and Anna is heading home for Thanksgiving. Her sister was heading out of town to spend the holiday with her in-laws, so she left her pets at the parents' house so that they could be watched over. As Anna walks into her parents' home, she sees Honey, healthy as can be, just sitting in the living room. Anna was of course overjoyed, but asked her mom why she had told her that Honey died. Anna's mom was super confused and said that that conversation never happened. After leaving her parents' house, Anna asked her boyfriend about it, and he said he was super glad that she brought it up because he also remembered the conversation. Did they somehow enter a world where Honey was still alive? While this would be such an amazing surprise, it would also be unbelievably creepy. In our number 2 spot today, this story comes from a guy who loves cars but had a weird moment about 15 years ago that he just couldn't get off of his mind. When he was in his early 20s, he loved to speed in cars and just wanted to go fast. His friend had a car that he really wanted to drive, and one day it just turned out to be his lucky day and his friend finally gave in. He hopped in the driver's seat with his friend who owned the car in the passenger seat and another buddy in the back, and off they went. They went to an empty freeway around 3 a.m. and put the pedal to the metal. Once they hit around 135 miles per hour, they began to see a bunch of semi-trucks. There were basically 3 driving side by side, taking up all 3 of the lanes, and certainly not going as fast as our speed demon friend. He thought to himself that there was an on-ramp coming up and he would just use that as some extra room to pass, but unfortunately, as he approached the on-ramp, another semi was entering the freeway and occupying that 4th lane. With all 4 semis lined up, he was approaching too fast with no time to brake, so he closed his eyes and prepared for the worst. But then nothing happened. He opened his eyes and the other guys in the car were just as confused as he was. Somehow they were now in front of all of the semis, but there was literally no room for them to have passed by. This was the end of his speeding career, as he was super spooked as to what possibly happened. Was this a real world glitch, or did he somehow enter a reality where he wasn't in an extremely dangerous and potentially fatal situation? And coming in at number 1. One day a guy gets a call from his neighbors asking him if he can help them move a mattress upstairs. They had a really great relationship with the neighbors, so he of course was willing to help. When he got there, they got the mattress all moved, and then the neighbors asked if he wouldn't mind helping with an armoire as well. No problem, he thought, as he began to help them move that one up the stairs as well. This is when things went awry. There were 11 stairs at the front, he was on the lower end carrying the armoire about 6 steps up, and his friend at the top lost a handle, and the whole thing came crashing down on him since he was at the bottom. He of course loses his balance and falls backwards towards the pavement, and this man actually remembers dying from this fall. The next thing he remembers though is waking up in his dining room with his phone ringing and his wife asking him if he's going to answer the phone. He's obviously super freaked out because he literally just died 2 seconds ago, but now he's here. When he answers the phone, it's his neighbor asking if he can help move a mattress up the stairs. He surprisingly goes over again to help, and when he gets there, he says that he can help with the mattress, but not with the armoire. His neighbor is shocked shocked because he doesn't know how he would have possibly known about this. Did this guy have some sort of premonition, or did his death in one reality bring him into a different reality? Who knows, but I really hope he is taking advantage of his second chance at life. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have two phones. This story had my mind absolutely blown, but when I looked at the replies, it was brought to a whole new level. This story reads, quote, "Okay, I know this sounds a bit crazy. So to start off my story, my mom and dad are divorced and my dad just came to pick me up. But yesterday my mom got an infection somewhere in her lower abdomen. While my dad was driving to his house, my dad started to call my mom and she picked up. But they couldn't hear each other. So my dad hung up, but then like 20 seconds later we both got a call at the same time, but by two different numbers. We both answered, and on the other line was my mom. We started talking and she sounded the same, but like I said, they were two different numbers, and me and my dad are just sitting there looking at each other like, are we losing our minds? We started to talk to, quote, my mom, and she was saying two different things while we were both talking to her. And now I don't know if I'm losing my mind or what." Okay, so I was like, that story is really strange and I don't really have an explanation for what could have happened there. Then I look at the replies because you know who always has explanations? Redditors. And one user replied with their theory that this was a case of a temporary reality slip or merge. Like, what in the world is that? My mind is blown. In our number 9 spot today we have The Nap. This wild story took place in 2022, and it starts off with the storyteller explaining that in that year, they took a nap and woke up in 2014. When they woke up, they were on the couch at their old job in their old uniform on a break. They knew something was wrong and that they were back in time, but to make matters weirder, they were like their 2020 self and what they look like currently, but they were in the year 2014, if that makes sense. From here they wrote, quote, "I looked around and ran down the hallway when my manager stopped me and asked me what was wrong. I asked him what year it was and he said 2014. I insisted to him it was 2020. I ran up the stairs and everyone was looking at me. Everyone was acting like I worked there the last 6 years and nothing changed. Everyone asked me what was wrong. Then they head to the apartment that they lived in 2014 and it looked exactly the same, and their parents were there who also confirmed that the year was 2014 and also began asking what was wrong and what was going on. This is when the story takes the craziest turn though. They open their bedroom door and their ex is lying in their bed, but this ex is also the current 2020 version of themselves, not the 2014 version, and they too have this awareness that they're back in time. They then went on to write, quote, "They told me they," meaning the ex, "brought me back. They were fully aware of what was happening. After talking for what felt like days in our old apartment, they left, and I went back to sleep in my own bed and woke up back in 2020 in my bed. I truly can't explain what on earth happened here, but it definitely is unbelievable." In our number 8 spot today we have Parallel You. This strange story starts out with the storyteller setting the scene for us. They wrote, quote, "This happened about 5 years ago when I lived with my parents. It was about 5 minutes after 8 a.m. and I had woken up, went downstairs and sat in the recliner. Dad was sleeping on the couch and mom was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, biscuits and gravy. Everything was normal. Okay, this sounds like a great time so far, but just wait. They then explained that they moved from the recliner to the dining room and then boom, suddenly they're at their friend Paul's house like they've been there the whole time. There are a couple other people there and someone who's underneath a jacked up car working on it. This is when they write, quote, "The guy underneath the car asked me to hand him the new muffler that was laying right beside where I was standing. I picked it up, I remember it had some weight to it, I recall the heat of the sun hitting me in the face. It was about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I knelt down to give him the muffler and the weight being lifted off when I handed it to him. It was just all so vivid." So now, when the storyteller went to stand back up, they heard this sound that was similar to the splash sound that occurs when somebody jumps into a pool. Immediately the sound then went into reverse and then there was a loud clap sound, and now they're back in their dining room. They go on to write, quote, "I looked around, looked at the clock and it was only 8:12. Dad was still on the couch, mom was still cooking breakfast, and I went into the kitchen to ask her what that loud clap was. She gave me a puzzled look and said, 'What clap?' I covered it up by saying it must have been on TV, and I sat back down trying to process what had just happened, knowing if I tried to tell her what happened that she might think I'm crazy. So I dropped it and moved on with my day as normal. I have never had anything like this happen before or since." They finish off their post by saying that they think they might have transported temporarily to their body in an alternate reality, and to be completely honest, I have no other ideas of what could have gone on here. In our number 7 spot today we have Who Was That? Okay, I'm gonna need your opinion on this one and what you guys think is going on here, because this one has me a bit confused. So this post says, quote, "This happened about 2 years ago. So my fiance and I were lying down in the living room. His face is facing towards me and my face is towards him. My face is looking towards the wall behind him and his face is towards the living room space. On the verge of waking up, my mom walks from the kitchen to her bedroom, in which you have to pass the living room in between. She asks, 'Are you both okay?' asking from her bedroom. Not thinking much, my fiance and I both answer, yes. In that moment, I got confused because I remember my mom telling me earlier in the morning that she was heading to town and she wouldn't be back until the afternoon. I get up from the couch, go to check her bedroom, and there is no sight of my mom anywhere. I told my mom about this and she confirmed that she had been in town from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. My fiance and I still talk about this to this day and we are still freaked out about this. So my first thought was obviously a dream, but the fact that they both experienced it is the thing I can't get past. So what do you think happened here? Some sort of shared dream experience, something to do with parallel universes, some weird ghost thing? At this point, I have no idea. In our number 6 spot today, we have the train to nowhere. It doesn't matter what train you're on, where it is, or whether it's underground or above ground, when the doors close, everything is lawless. I feel like trains are always the portal to another world, and this story only proves my theory. This story reads, quote, "3 years ago I was riding a train, got my ticket checked and took my seat. A few stops later someone else turned up and seemed to have booked the exact same seat to the same destination. The same train conductor that checked my ticket earlier came, we compared our tickets, and it turned out I was booked on a non-existent train number with the same destination and time, but strangely enough I had the same name as the one I shared a seat number with. Tried to check up on the number from my ticket afterwards and didn't get any hits for my actual train number." This is fully some platform 9 3/4 stuff that I cannot understand. In our number 5 spot today, we have Am I Really Here? Okay, this Reddit story starts off with the OP explaining that on February 20th, 2022, they dreamed that they were in a car accident. They then go into extremely vivid detail of the scenario that led up to the accident itself, and then the aftermath of it, and they could so viscerally feel all of the things as they were happening. Their car ended up in water and they found themselves unable to escape, and they explained the thoughts that flashed through their mind of their family. Their phone was nearby and they managed to call their girlfriend who didn't answer, and they left one last voicemail. It's all very detailed and horrifyingly sad, and they end it by writing, quote, "I remember crying to myself, trying to think of something else I could do to get out of this, to survive, but the water kept rising, and in the end I simply stared up through it at the faint flashing light at the surface, blue and red. I prayed until my vision went black and I couldn't fight to hold my breath any longer. And then I woke up, alone in bed, freezing with a cold sweat, but awake and confused. I don't know how or why I'm here, because I died. I felt my body die. I felt the water enter my lungs and the pain that it caused. I felt it all. I shouldn't be here." So this person thinks that they passed away in one reality and jumped into this one where that was all just a terrible nightmare. That is horrifying. That would be the most terrifying experience ever. Was this just a very vivid nightmare or an example of someone who jumped universes? In our number 4 spot today, we have The Real Me. Okay, this story is a bit of a longer one, but it's so worth it, I swear. It reads, quote, "I was shopping at a thrift store in a small town I lived in several years ago. I was looking around and happened to be near the checkout counter. An old lady came out from the back and said, 'Are you?' said my name. I said yes, figuring I'd worked with her or something in the past, although she didn't look familiar to me. My name is not super common anymore, although I do see it on personalized items on a very infrequent basis. She was really excited to see me. She asked if I was still working at a certain school in a neighboring town about a half-hour away. I was confused and told her I'd never worked at a school in that town or any town. She appeared confused and stated that we had worked at the school together for a long time. I politely said that she must have me confused with someone else. She seemed like she was kind of scared at that point and again asked if my name was what she had stated before. I said yes, and she said, 'Well, you look just like her.' We chatted a bit about this other person and I asked what this other person's last name was and gave mine. She said she didn't remember, but she could have sworn that I was her. We laughed about it and I finished my shopping and left. I didn't think much about this till a few weeks later when I was walking down a street near my house. A woman, not the one from the thrift shop, came out out of her house, saw me, and asked if my name was, said my name. I said yes. She also became excited and asked if I was still working at the school in the nearby town. I again explained that she must have me confused with someone else. She also said that I looked just like this other person with the same name, and she also didn't know the other woman's last name. This actually did creep me out. I've been mistaken for other people before, but not twice in the same month for a person who looks like me and has the same name with the same spelling. I think it is possible another reality crossed briefly with this one, and this was the result. No one has mistaken me for this woman since. You guys, imagine how strange that would be. I swear I wouldn't go anywhere ever again. In our number 3 spot today, we have the memories. Okay, this story starts off on June 16th, 2015. Our storyteller was really into visiting the skate park at this time and was on an out-of-town trip with their mom and ended up visiting a skate park while on this trip. While at the park, they unfortunately ended up getting in an accident that led to them being unconscious for a few minutes and having a few minor injuries, such as broken ribs. It definitely could have been worse, and they were lucky to walk away from the accident, but during their time unconscious, they experienced something that they refer to as the 7 minutes. During this period, they explained that their life flashed before their eyes and that they went through basically all of their memories, and then it was black. When they woke up, after some time, they began to realize that while everyone looks the same, no one shares any of the same memories that they now have, the ones they saw during the 7 minutes. They have also stated that they now have this ability to feel when a family member dies, and as an example, they explained that they told their mother of their grandfather's death 20 minutes before she got the call. I think that would have been a really weird conversation, but once the phone call came, it was likely quite eerie. In our number 2 spot today, we have a bike ride to another universe. This is a story that I have no explanation as to what could have happened, but when I first read it, it gave me that shivery kind of feeling. It was posted on Reddit and they wrote, quote, "I was 11, maybe 12. We lived on this large piece of land in the desert with a truck repair shop on it. Most of the time we'd hear the mechanic tinkering away in the shop, or our neighbor would be sitting out on his step. In the summer of 2013, I rode my bike out to the back of the property. There was a big hole with sheet metal covering it, and I liked to ride my bike across because it would make an awesome thunder-like noise. I had done it hundreds of times, but this time it was different. I rode across, and when my bike tires touched the dirt, I immediately felt different. Everything felt too silent. Everything felt static, like it was frozen. Like if I tried to move anything, it wouldn't move. I was honestly too nervous to ride back to my house. I felt like I would show up and everyone would be gone. Just missing. No people, no animals. I took a 15-minute break and just pedaled back. I always think about this. Maybe the vibration from the sheet metal was enough to create some sort of disturbance. Maybe being off in the back of the property by myself, but I loved doing that because nobody bothered me while I rode my bike. I never had any other experiences like that, and every time I went back to that part of the property, I would take my dog with me on a leash so I wouldn't be all alone." What do you guys think happened here? In our number 1 spot today, we have Breakfast in a Parallel Universe. Breakfast at Tiffany's or Breakfast in a Parallel Universe, this Reddit story honestly could be the plot of a movie. The Redditor wrote, quote, "My husband and I bought a country house, a place that we go to and work on most weekends. It's in a small town in Texas. One weekend we happened upon a restaurant that we had never noticed before. We entered and I remembered an older man, another customer with a cowboy hat on, said, 'You can just seat yourselves.' So we made our way to a little table that was open in the middle of the busy restaurant. We ordered breakfast, ate, and left. Everything seemed normal. 1 or 2 weeks later, we tried to find the same restaurant and never could find it. We drove all around the town and on each of the roads out of town and never found it. The building where I could have sworn it was boarded up and abandoned. The building looked the same but long deserted." I feel like this could either be like a cool drama or an awesome eerie thriller, you know? But either way, this story would have had me extremely confused and questioning a lot of things. It's crazy to me that they both experienced the same thing because it takes away a ton of other possible explanations. Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have The Close Call. This story comes from a guy who loves cars but had a weird moment about 15 years ago that he just couldn't get off of his mind. When he was in his early 20s, he loved to speed in cars and just wanted to go fast. His friend had a car that he really wanted to drive, and one day it just turned out to be his lucky day and his friend finally gave in. He hopped in the driver's seat with his friend who owned the car in the passenger seat and another buddy in the back, and off they went. They went to an empty freeway around 3 a.m. and put the pedal to the metal. Once they hit around 135 miles per hour, they began to see a bunch of semi-trucks. There were 3 basically driving side by side, taking up all 3 of the lanes, and certainly not going as fast as our speed demon friend. He thought to himself that there was an on-ramp coming up and he would just use that as some extra room to pass, but unfortunately as he approached the on-ramp, another semi was entering the freeway and occupying that 4th lane. With all 4 semis lined up, he was approaching too fast with no time to brake, so he closed his eyes and prepared for the worst. But then, nothing happened. He opened his eyes and the other guys in the car were just as confused as he was. Somehow they were now in front of all of the semis, but there was literally no room for them to have passed by them. This was the end of his speeding career, as he was super spooked as to what possibly just happened. Was this a real world glitch, or did he somehow enter a reality where he wasn't in an extremely dangerous and potentially fatal situation? In our number 9 spot today, we have The Strange Storm. This story goes that a couple were at home just doing some household chores when something super strange happened to them. The husband went to open the front door to toss a dirty rug out of the house, and it was just completely pitch black outside. The weird part is that it was at 2 p.m. and from inside the house it looked like a regular sunny afternoon with light coming in from the windows. They said that suddenly outside the front door where it was dark, it's like the sun was a light bulb and it just went on, then off again, and then on. They described it like the flickering a light bulb does right before it's burnt out. The wife asked her husband if he had seen that and he replied, "Yes, what just happened?" They also said there weren't any clouds out either, so it couldn't have been a cloud blocking the sun. Were they transported to some alternate reality for a second? I honestly have no explanation for what the pair witnessed. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Disappearing Town. This story comes from a person who often commutes to a town around 3 hours away from the one that they live in. One day they were doing the 3-hour drive with their mom and they got to the part that takes about 1/3 of the entire drive, and it's an area that just has a lot of like mountains and cliffs and nature. So the person telling the story is in the passenger seat and their mom is driving, and as they look out the side of the window over one of the cliffs, they see a small community that they had never seen before. The community looked nice and it consisted of mostly bungalows, which is apparently not normal for the area. Both them and their mom were super confused as to how they had never seen this community before, but it gets even weirder. They never saw the community again. It just disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Did they accidentally drive into another dimension one day? In our number 7 spot today, we have Slightly Different. One morning in 2008, a woman named Lorena woke up in a life that was similar to the one she was living in when she went to sleep, but certainly not the same. At first, it was just things like her bed sheets and pajamas, but when she got to work, things began to escalate. Lorena realized that her office wasn't her office and that she worked in the same building, but in a completely different department. She had never even met her boss before, so she knew this couldn't have just been a moment where she got lost or confused. When she returned home after the workday, she was met by her ex-boyfriend, only to find out that he was apparently her current boyfriend. She tried to find the person that she had been dating for months, but he didn't seem to exist in this new life and world that she now found herself in. Lorena began to seek psychiatric help because she was fearing she was having some sort of nervous breakdown, but all the tests revealed that she seemed to be of sound body and mind. The strange occurrences continued when Lorena asked her family how her sister was doing. Lorena knew that her sister had recently had shoulder surgery and she wanted to check in, but when she asked her family, they were baffled by her claims and insisted that there was no surgery that had taken place on anyone in the family. Lorena couldn't find any answers to her situation and was having no luck with a medical explanation either. She is convinced that she went to sleep one night and woke up in a parallel universe that was altered slightly by small decisions that she had made. Honestly, after all of these stories, I think I kinda might believe her too. In our number 6 spot today, we have Moving. So this story comes from Reddit and it starts off one day when a guy gets a call from his neighbors asking him if he can help them move a mattress upstairs. They had a good relationship with the neighbors, so of course he was willing to help. When he got there, they got the mattress all moved and the neighbors asked if he wouldn't mind helping with an armoire as well. No problem, he thought, as he began to help them move that one up the stairs as well. This is when things went awry, however. There were 11 stairs at the front, he was on the lower end carrying the armoire, and about 6 steps up his friend at the top lost a handle on it, and the whole thing came crashing down on him since he was of course at the bottom. He loses his balance and falls backwards towards the pavement, and this man actually remembers dying from this fall. The next thing he remembers though is waking up in his dining room with his phone ringing and his wife asking him if he's going to answer the phone. He is obviously super freaked out because he literally just remembers dying 2 seconds ago, but now he's here? When he answers the phone, it's his neighbor asking if he can help move a mattress up the stairs. He surprisingly goes over again to help, and when he gets there he says he can help with the mattress but not with the armoire. This neighbor is shocked because he doesn't know how he could have possibly known about the armoire. Did the guy have some sort of premonition, or did his death in one reality bring him into a different one? Who knows, but I hope he's taking advantage of this second lease on life. In our number 5 spot today we have the breath. This Reddit post comes from the user cat22l, and they wrote, quote, "About 30 seconds ago I was sitting on the couch as my dog walked by to go sit on her bed we have behind the L part of the sectional. She had something small caught in her throat last night, I think a popcorn shell, so I was paying attention to her breathing just to make sure she got it out. For a few minutes she was breathing fine, and then what sounded like a light snore started happening. This is semi-normal for her depending on what position she's laying in, so I didn't bother to go over and check on her. That went on for about 5 minutes until the most disgusting, and to my now realization terrifying, snore/cough/wheezing sounds started happening. I go over to her to make sure she's okay, and the exact moment I looked at her bed, the sound stopped mid-breath and she wasn't there. She was outside with my parents and had been for around 30 minutes. There's no way to get out of the room without walking right past me. I don't know whose dog I saw and what was making that creepy ass sound 5 feet away from me, but I'm going to be staying outside for the rest of the day and hiring an exorcist. Maybe this is a weird parallel universe story, or maybe this is just a full-on demon. What do you guys think? In our number 4 spot today we have the road trip. One day in 2006, a woman named Carol was driving through San Bernardino, California on her way to Paris, California, where she was going to stay for a few days. On her travels, she saw a sign for Riverside, which was nearby, and she decided that since her family had roots there, maybe it was time to stop in for a visit. As she went into Riverside, she realized that everything looked different from how she remembered it, and she was unable to find her old house that she grew up in. She tried to go to the street that her grandmother used to live on, but that one was different too. And when she tried to visit her grandparents' graves at the cemetery, the whole place didn't even exist. Even the people who were living in the town gave Carol a bad feeling, and she didn't even want to get out of her car. She decided she would be better off just continuing on her trip, and she left Riverside. Carol didn't return to Riverside until a few years later after her dad had passed away and she was attending the funeral. To Carol's surprise, when she went to Riverside this time, everything was as she remembered it from her childhood. Carol believes that somehow that day she ended up in some sort of a parallel universe form of Riverside, and she even said that she felt like if she left her car that day, she was going to get stuck there. In our number 3 spot today we have the new location. So one day this person was driving to work on the same route that they took every single day. They worked the whole day through and got into their car to head back home on the same path. As they're driving, they start feeling super anxious and like on the verge of a panic attack. They keep driving and then they suddenly see this huge power plant all lit up. They're super confused because they drive this road every single day. How could they miss this glaringly obvious thing? Then their boyfriend calls and asks them to pick up McDonald's on the way home. No problem, they go through the drive-thru. When they get to the window, they see an employee they've never seen before, even though they are at this same McDonald's almost every single day, and this new employee is the only one there, and they say that they've been working there for around 2 months. They take the food and head home, and when they get there, they begin to tell the boyfriend about this strange power plant that they saw. Their boyfriend explains that it's always been there, so he doesn't know what they're talking about. Now every day they drive past this power plant with no idea how it got there or how they had missed it, but they've also noticed a few other small differences in their life. Their dog doesn't know the tricks it used to know, or how their boyfriend pronounces some words differently from before. Maybe they slipped into a new dimension on their drive home from work that day. In our number 2 spot today we have Honey. This story starts off with a woman who we'll call Anna having her bi-weekly phone call with her mom just to catch up and see what's going on. Anna's mom unfortunately had to inform her that Anna's sister's dog named Honey had passed away. Anna was obviously super upset at this loss and called her sister to check in after hearing the news. Anna asked tons of questions about where they were planning to bury her, as well as asking how her sister's son was doing with the loss. Anna told her boyfriend how upset she was about the loss of the dog, as they had really had a bond. Flash forward a couple of months and Anna is heading home for Thanksgiving. Her sister was heading out of town to spend the holiday with her in-laws, so she left her pets at the parents' house so that they could be watched over. As Anna walks into her parents' home, she sees Honey, healthy as can be, sitting in the living room. Anna was of course overjoyed, but asked her mom why she had told her that Honey died. Anna's mom was very confused and said that that conversation never happened. After leaving her parents, Anna asked her boyfriend and he said he was super glad that she brought it up because he also remembered this conversation. Did they somehow enter a world where Honey was still alive? While this would be such an amazing surprise, it would also be unbelievably creepy. In our number 1 spot today we have The Crosswalk. Okay, maybe a parallel universe story, maybe a glitch in the Matrix story. Either way, when I came across this one on Reddit, it actually gave me goosebumps because it was just so strange. So let me set the stage for you. The original poster of this story, for a few weeks prior to this incident, had been noticing this sort of mundane thing that he found that many people did. The thing was how pedestrians will wait at a crosswalk until the walk sign comes on, and when it does, he was finding that people will usually pull their cell phones out of their pocket and look at them as they walk across the street. Nothing too strange there, it was just a thing that he had noticed. So flash forward to this specific incident, this guy is driving with his daughter. He goes on to write, quote, "We stopped at a red light at a crossing and there was a man standing there. Nothing out of the ordinary, denim jacket, black cap, glasses, around 6'2". I thought I'd try to weird out my young daughter. She's 5, so I knew this was going to blow her damn mind. So I said, see that man? When the walking man goes green and he starts to walk across, he'll reach into his pocket and pull out his phone and start looking at it. Watch and see. As he walks across, he reaches into his pocket, but then immediately takes his hand out and looks and points right at me with his mouth open, smiling like a gotcha stance. Of course, my daughter found this absolutely hilarious, and I sat there completely mind blown. I must have sat there in silence looking at him walk across for the next 10 seconds. I drove on and had a look at him as I drove past, and he was smirking and laughing. Of course, I'm thinking that he must have heard this guy somehow, but the poster goes on to say that the windows were up, the radio was on, his voice was at a completely normal volume, and this crosswalk guy would have been like 15 to 20 feet away. He finishes the post by saying, quote, "I can't figure out at all how he could have heard me. It's literally impossible. How did he know I was trying to predict he'd reach into his pocket for his phone? The only even remote possibility I can think of is that he has had the same observation as me and thought I might be thinking the same thing, so he just went for it. But realistically, what are even the chances of this?" This story truly is just an incredibly weird one. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Cornfield. This story is about how someone believes that they may have somehow accidentally ended up in a universe similar to the one that they're used to, but this new one has just small changes that are beginning to freak them out a bit. They explain, quote, "So I live by a cornfield and have noticed small changes in my world, and the most major change I noticed just hours ago was that my entire house was on the other side of the street. I go home from school the same way every day. I end up going down my road, then turning right into my driveway. Today I went home the exact same way, but when I was getting ready to turn right, I noticed a cornfield. So I pull over to see what happened, then I turned around and noticed my house was on the completely opposite side of the road. I think my world is changing more than I first thought. Has something like this happened to anyone else? I mean, I have the same question now. Has this ever happened to any of you guys? I honestly wouldn't even know what to do." In our number 9 spot today, we have A Reverse in Time. This is a story that was posted to Reddit with the title Reverse in Time, which of course had me intrigued right off the bat. They start off by explaining that they have had 2 weird, sort of unexplainable things happen to them recently, and they explain that the first one happened when they gifted their boyfriend one of those chocolate oranges. They gave it to him because they remembered that his mom gave him one for Christmas every single year for their 8-year relationship, and she knew that he loved them. She saw an opportunity to get one and thought it might be a nice little surprise. Here's where the weird thing comes in though. When she gives it to him, he has no idea what it is. He claims that he had never seen one nor had one of these chocolate chocolate oranges before and was completely bewildered, and then when he tried it, he hated it. Okay, definitely a little suspicious, but maybe they just got something mixed up. Then they go on to tell this story. Quote, I had just gotten out of the grocery store and was pushing my cart towards my car when all of a sudden I looked down and the cart was gone. I looked around and I wasn't even in the store parking lot anymore. I was in a parking lot of an apartment complex that my best friend moved out of years ago. The other thing that was freaky was my car keys were completely different. To be exact, they were the keys to my car that I had in 2015. I looked around panicked and actually saw my old car. I had a rubber duck on the dashboard of that car and the same duck was there. I remember feeling my stomach drop and an overwhelming feeling of dread at this realization. This was a horrible time in my life and I would do anything to not have to relive it. Then my ears started ringing and my head started hurting like a migraine was coming on, so I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in the grocery store parking lot with the correct keys and my current car. I can't explain this and I'm still confused by this. I'm confused by this and I didn't even have to live it. I can't even imagine. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Cuddy effect. This is one story that might be a parallel universe story, or maybe it's one sign of the Mandela effect. I'm wondering if anyone else shares this same memory with this person, so once you hear the story, let us know down below in the comments. We all know how often it happens that someone will start circulating a fake death claim about a celebrity on the internet. It happens all of the time for some morbid reason. The storyteller explains that they know this and assure all of us that this is not the case in their situation. They say that they remember the artist Kid Cudi passing away sometime in 2018 or 2019. They say that they can remember seeing it on the news and it being shared on social media and everyone was really upset. So flash forward to just a couple days ago and they hear their sister talking about the new Kanye West and Kid Cudi drama that has been going on, and they say it's weird that Kanye would have beef with Cudi since he died. This is when they go on to Google it and realize now that they can't find any news on Kid Cudi passing away, and that is of course because whatever timeline we're in, that never happened. It would definitely be a conflicting feeling to have this clear memory that you swear is real, but everything around you is telling you it's not. In our number 7 spot today, we have the missing typewriter. This story comes from Reddit and they write, quote, as a kid I remember having a typewriter and I remember I used to love typing nonsense on it, pretend files and telegrams. A few years ago I bought a typewriter from eBay and I asked my mom about that typewriter and she had no idea what I was talking about. I asked my dad and he had no idea. I asked my cousins who I remember using it with and they had no idea. I remember so well it's frightening. That was years ago. I still don't understand. I also remember a few other things like having a desk and chair in my bedroom. Also no one remembers that. And there are many pictures of me in my room as a kid, yet none exist of these little memories I have. Is it possible I passed through a parallel universe after my childhood? Does anyone else have childhood memories that never happened? Childhood items that never existed? That's a great question. I had a teddy bear called Ears that my dog destroyed one year, but if I call my dad and find out that he never existed, I would be pretty confused. It's a small thing, but I can totally understand why this would be a very weird feeling. In our number 6 spot today, we have an alternate world. This story starts off with them explaining that ever since they were a teenager, they dreamed of this alternate life they have where they go to university and work in the city. It started around age 16 and they are now 25. They say that this other life is really detailed, like it basically is like living an entirely other life. They then go on to write, quote, last night I was feeling sick and in return had one of the most vivid dreams I had in a long time. I met someone and developed a deep relationship that felt incredibly emotional and real. Luckily, I woke up right when I was trying to navigate Google Maps to drive to a park, so I remember the street we were on. It was called Dutch Island Road. Never heard of it in real life, so I decided to look it up. The only thing that popped up was a rural area in Rhode Island. It wasn't exactly the same layout of roads I remembered on the map, but the nature and area look eerily similar to what I saw while driving. I started looking around the area, clicking different locations, and started to freak out at how everything looks just like in my dream. Mind you, I've never been to Rhode Island, but the weirdest part is that specific buildings in the Rhode Island University and Warwick are the ones I see in my dream all the time. What? How could they have so accurately dreamed of something they had never seen in real life? They go on to say, quote, I've always thought my dreams were a glimpse of living in an alternate universe, and I feel like this detail solidifies the potential of it being a reality. In our number 5 spot today, we have New Year, New World. This story is one that starts off with a bang. quite literally. It starts off on New Year's Eve 2020 when the storyteller was about to leave work and fell down a flight of stairs. They broke their nose when it hit the concrete stair, and despite this obviously terrible injury, they explained that they think they actually died in their old universe and somehow transferred over into this one where they were able to survive their injuries. They say they've started to notice slight changes, like the mask they were wearing when the fall occurred. They remember being filled and basically ruined with blood from their injury, but suddenly they find this mask in their bag perfectly clean with no evidence of the fall. Also, the spot where the fall occurred clearly hadn't been cleaned due to the presence of other dirt and debris, but following the incident, there was no blood there either. This is especially weird considering the steps were concrete, so you think that there would be some sort of evidence. They go on to write about how they then began to notice small changes in those around them, with the biggest one being in reference to their mom. When they were a child, they remember their mother having breast cancer and thankfully being able to overcome it. After the fall, and when they believed they transferred universes, they were speaking to their mother on the phone and somehow got on the topic when their mother seemed really confused and explained that she had never had cancer or really anything of the sort. They remember it so well they even remember passing notes about it to their friends in class and worrying about it for months. They were of course happy to hear that their mother's healthy, but how could they possibly have this memory too? It's definitely all very strange. In our number 4 spot today we have Somehow. This story comes from Reddit and they quickly start off by explaining that somehow, suddenly, they don't know when or how it happened, but they just woke up in a universe that wasn't their own. They have a few examples of how they know this, some are a little more bizarre than others, but they're all examples nonetheless. So basically they start by explaining that a statue in their town isn't where they remember it being. The next example is that they remember harvest mites or berry bugs, and they remember and have actually had multiple occasions of them burying themselves into their skin, but in our timeline or universe, that isn't what those bugs do. Those were the more out there reasons, but the others consist of memories they have of childhood that have never happened, a movie they used to watch a bunch of times no longer existing anymore, and now they are suddenly friends and acquaintances with a bunch of people they'd never even met before. Certain things about their wife are different, including the ring she wears, and some foods are tasting different to them. It seems as though one day they woke up in a slightly altered universe from the one they were living in before. In our number 3 spot today we have The Cemetery. This story comes from Reddit and it was posted with the title, quote, "I think my kids and I may have traveled to an alternate universe." They write about how a couple months ago they and their kids were walking through and around a cemetery. Their children are 13 and 9, and during their little walk they ended up heading through the entire cemetery and they came across a small beautiful mausoleum. They remember it so well that they even noted how the last person to be placed within the mausoleum happened about 50 years prior. So then, a few weeks later, they were walking through the cemetery again with their kids, but this time they brought their mom as well. I know, I'm also questioning why this family likes to take strolls through a cemetery, but they do say that they do this to ground them. Anyway, the kids began to tell their grandmother about the mausoleum they saw last time and asked if they could show her and visit it again. But when they go and try and find the mausoleum, it isn't anywhere. They search for at least half an hour and with no luck, they ask someone who helps tend to the area and he says that no such thing exists. They say that the cemetery is small enough that there should be no issue locating it, but it just doesn't seem to exist at all anymore. Both she and her kids remember what it looked like so clearly, so how could it have just disappeared? Now they've got me thinking that this mausoleum was somehow a portal to another reality. In our number 2 spot today we have The Eclipse. This story originally took place in 2017 during the eclipse. The storyteller is located in Virginia, and based on that, they wouldn't get to experience the total eclipse, but would see some of it. They go on to write, quote, "I had just gotten off of work and entered my apartment. The time was 2:15 p.m. and the eclipse wouldn't happen for another half hour. I decided to change my clothes and take a quick nap. I set an alarm clock for 20 minutes and drifted off to sleep. I also want to note that I was living on my own. When I woke up, it felt like at least an hour had passed. I was really disappointed because I wanted to experience the eclipse. I looked at the time on my phone and no time had passed. It was 2:20 p.m. I thought I'd stay awake instead and sit on my porch, but when I had gotten out and sat down, I noticed it was dead quiet. Nothing. I heard no cars, I saw no neighbors, I didn't see a single bird. I wasn't asleep. I tested it. I left my apartment and my complex and nothing. I walked to the stores across from me and they were all closed. There was no wind rustling through the leaves on the trees. I could not even find an ant. I tried to call people on my contact list and everything went to voicemail. It was as though every living being stopped existing. Throughout my my adventure, the eclipse darkened and lightened the sky. I went back home, I sat on my couch, the rest of the day continued. I went to sleep that night. When I woke up, it was 3 p.m. on the same day. The eclipse had just ended. I missed my alarm. It was like it never happened. I've been waiting to tell this story for the longest. I have no idea where I was, but that place was just as real as this dimension. I don't know where they went, but they swear it wasn't of this earth anymore. Whether it was another planet, another dimension, or something else entirely, I'll never know. Maybe it was just a really strange and vivid dream, but at this point, who knows for sure. In our number 1 spot today, we have 3 years. This is a story that the person telling it explained is something that has made them feel as if they are going crazy for the last 3 years, but once they began to read other stories of similar experiences, they are beginning to think it's a sign that they are in a parallel universe to the one that they grew up in. They say that for 3 years they've been trapped in a body that is not their own. They say, quote, "I am in my body, but just not the size I was. I weighed 540 pounds and was 5'6", but now I'm 260 pounds and 5'10". Not a big difference in height, but the weight is noticeable. I did not have a family, but now I have many children and a grandchild. This took some time getting used to. I never served in the military, but in this life I served for 4 years and went to college on a GI Bill. Zero memories of this time in my life, but I did go to the same school on a scholarship in my life." They go on to say that they've just been basically faking it for the last few years and aren't sure where the real and the fake ends. They always just feel a little out of step with this world and they don't quite feel comfortable in their own skin. They've tried to get back into their other life, but just can't seem to figure out how.